There's another issue I want to raise, relates to the administration, and you have to go back in history to appreciate it. Richard Nixon. Students of history, of course, know that name. Former vice president of the United States, former senator, he was a senator and a congressman, vice president under President Eisenhower, and then president of the United States. He went through a period we know as Watergate. It was controversial. Some people broke into the Democratic National Headquarters. They were caught. They were prosecuted. When it was all over, we had the Watergate investigation, and ultimately President Nixon resigned. But before he resigned, he instructed his staff to give him background information on his enemies list, the people that he considered to be his political enemies. And the word was out that they were going to be treated harshly by his administration, whether it's Department of Justice or the Internal Revenue Service. Well, we went through that chapter, he resigned, and then Congress came together, Democrats and Republicans, and said, we can never let this happen again. We can't let a president put his finger on somebody and say, that's a political enemy, go prosecute him. Try to find them guilty of a crime. Make sure they pay a fine. Give them bad publicity. We agreed on a bipartisan basis for standards between the White House, the Department of Justice, and Congress when it came to these political decisions that could ultimately result in prosecution. Well, under President Trump, we're back into the Nixon conversation about enemies list, except President Trump's enemies list is longer than anything Richard Nixon ever dreamed of. And that's what we're looking at now. On September 20th, the acting U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia, Eric Seibert, announced his resignation. Acting U.S. Attorney appointed by Trump resigned. Mr. Seibert resisted President Trump's demands to bring charges without sufficient evidence against New York Attorney General Letitia James and former FBI Director James Comey. Mr. Seibert, a Republican appointed by Donald Trump just a few weeks ago, stayed true to his oath to the Constitution and his commitment to follow the facts and the law. And for that, he was forced to resign his office. In his place, President Trump installed his personal attorney, an attorney with no experience as a prosecutor, never did it before, to indict James Comey in a politically motivated case considered by career prosecutors in that office too weak to bring charges. This indictment represents the latest step in President Trump's long crusade to weaponize the federal government against his perceived political enemies, a return to the days of Richard Nixon. We remember when the president was initially impeached in the first of his historic 2 impeachments after he attempted to pressure a foreign ally to dig up dirt against Joe Biden and his family. And we remember when President Trump turned a mob of insurrectionists loose on our Capitol, where they violently attempted to prevent the peaceful transfer of power leading to his second impeachment. I will never forget that day as long as I live, January 6th. It has been my honor to serve in this chamber 29 years. I've seen a lot. I'm honored to represent a great state like Illinois, but I will never forget that moment when we were sitting here counting the Electoral College votes as to what the American people had decided on the next president. Vice President Pence was presiding. We were seated in our chairs. I noticed something unusual. Those 2 doors opened, and 4 or 5 people walked in up to the vice president and literally yanked him out of his chair and took him out the door. We knew there was a political demonstration outside, but all of a sudden it turned bad and scary and dangerous. Capitol Police came in and announced to us seated in this chamber, stay in your desks. We're going to make this a safe chamber in the Capitol. Don't worry about those people demonstrating outside. They're not going to get close to the chamber. Just stay where you are. We looked at one another and thought, what's next? Well, what was next was 10 minutes later, the same policeman came in and said, leave immediately. Don't take anything with you, just get out of the chamber. It's too dangerous for you to stay here. And we all, Democrats and Republicans, filed out those doors. You know what happened next. The insurrectionists took over this building. It was one of the most embarrassing moments in the history of the United States Capitol building. Imagine, if you will, for a moment, if you heard the news that the House of Commons in Parliament had its door broken down and people raided the chamber, you'd say to yourself, what is going on in England, for goodness sakes? The House of Commons taken over by people in the street? That is exactly what happened here. And it happened on January 6th. And so this president, embarrassed by that moment, maybe, who knows if he's ever embarrassed, decided he would go after the people who prosecuted the insurrectionists, the people who were prosecuted for crimes like beating up policemen. You all came here today and we welcome you to this chamber. The reason you're safe in this building today is a lot of women and men in uniform who are guarding you and me and all of our staff so that we can do the people's business. Those people were under attack by the January 6th insurrectionists. These were not curious tourists who came in here. They ended up beating on these police, and 140 of them were seriously injured. If you believe it, in this second administration, the president has gone further than Richard Nixon and what he's done before. His political appointees have fired FBI agents and federal prosecutors who were called on to prosecute the insurrectionists. He has installed loyalists whose chief qualification is their loyalty to him, not their loyalty to the law or the Constitution. We recently learned a top federal prosecutor in Sacramento was fired after she advised the Border Patrol to comply with a court order. Yes, the Trump administration fired a career prosecutor for following a court order. Never in our history in the history of our country has a president so brazenly demanded the baseless prosecution of his rivals, and he doesn't even try to conceal it or hide it. He glories in this constitutional outrage. In a social media post, President Trump issued a command to Attorney General Bondi, and I quote, "They impeached me twice and indicted me 5 times over nothing. Justice must be served now. We can't delay any longer." He's referring to the prosecution of James Comey. Imagine that, a sitting president commanding his attorney general to prosecute state and federal officials who simply tried to uphold the rule of law. That's exactly what this president is doing. What Richard Nixon was stopped from doing, he is doing. Since Watergate, Republican and Democratic presidents alike respect the independence of the Justice Department, recognizing that shielding it from the pull of politics was essential to safeguarding the rule of law. Under President Trump, those constitutional guardrails have been removed, destroyed. I want to be clear. What you're seeing from the Trump White House is not normal. This just isn't some inside the Beltway drama. If the president can turn the Department of Justice and the FBI into his own personal police force to target his political enemies, he can just as easily turn it against ordinary Americans. And the dam is already starting to break. The president sent active duty forces into Los Angeles earlier this year to put down protest of his administration's cruel immigration raids. He threatened to make war on the city of Chicago, which I'm honored to represent, by sending forces into that city as well as Memphis, Tennessee, and has now ordered the military to Portland with authorization to use, quote, full force in Portland, Oregon. The governor of Oregon, the mayor of Portland said what the president said about being at war and unlivable is just plain wrong, and yet he does it. It's a slippery slope into authoritarianism. Once DOJ and our military have been politicized, there are few guardrails left. So while today it's Letitia James and James Comey who are the targets, tomorrow it could be our fellow citizens who dare to even criticize the policies of the Trump regime. That is the risk we face and the danger that lies ahead in its perilous moment. That's why I've opened an investigation calling for answers from Attorney General Bondi, including making available several Trump-installed loyalists for questioning. The American people deserve to know if the chief law enforcement agency of the United States is following the Constitution or pursuing political revenge. Let me end this. During the Watergate scandal, President Nixon attempted to bend the Department of Justice to his will, to go after his enemies, conceal his administration's involvement in this unlawful conduct. When President Nixon did this, Democrats and Republicans on a bipartisan basis in Congress sounded the alarm together, and defended the rule of law. On a bipartisan basis, we responded to Nixon. Those legislatures recognized the danger posed by a president attempting to wield power and benefit him personally. They knew it was unconstitutional, and they stood firm on a bipartisan basis in Congress. Where is that same courage today? It's time for the Republicans to join Democrats and step up and say, enough is enough. This is not about political parties. It's about protecting our democracy from a would-be dictator intent on setting it all ablaze to achieve his personal aims. This is a code red alarm for the rule of law. And unless we come together to stop the president's abuses, I fear this administration will continue to corrode our American democracy. My question is this: is there one Republican senator in this chamber who gives a damn? I yield the floor.